Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is Noah Cowan. He's the Executive Director of SFFILM. Welcome to the show, Noah.
Thanks, Kamla.
SFFILM, I only knew it as San Francisco Film Society. What happened?
Well, we actually did a real review of who we are and our own identity over the last number of years, and it's something that's been overdue. It's one of my predecessors began the process almost 10 years ago. Basically, we saw our role as being larger than, say, a film society, which is a very particular idea. It's almost like something on a college campus, to something a bit broader. And I think after we were able to absorb the sort of artist development and artist services aspects of the Film Arts Foundation, after we began a really extensive education and youth education program, it became essential that we actually thought of ourselves in different terms because we were a totally different organization. Many people don't know this, but we're actually the largest granting organization in the country.
Largest for filmmakers?
For fiction films, yeah. Give over $1 million away a year in order to some of the best films of the year to be made. I mean, we've been instrumental in films like Fruitvale Station and Short Term 12 and Beasts of the Southern Wild, and just made sure that these incredible films get made. And one of the biggest films of the year so far, Patti Cakes, which is going to be the centerpiece of our festival and one of the big films from Sundance, was actually supported by our institution. So we're not the old San Francisco International Film Festival, San Francisco Film Society, of years past. We're a new kind of organization, and so it's been very important for us to rethink it. And so SFFILM was the moniker that made the most sense. It's just a very clear phrase that if it's film in San Francisco, it's SFFILM, it's us.
So what does SFFILM do? I know you hold the International Film Festival every year, and you hold smaller film festivals like New Italian Cinema or Japan.
We don't really do that one anymore, but I'll tell you. Okay. So there's basically 5 things. It's pretty simple. There's a film festival, SFFILM Film Festival. Then we have a SFFILM Presents, which is we do special presentations and small festivals throughout the rest of the year. The festivals now, there's really only 2. We do a real tribute to Hong Kong because this is a city with a really robust and culturally curious Chinese community, a very large one, and so we want to be able to kind of help bring new films from Hong Kong to that.
Why are you saying Hong Kong and not China?
It's really focused on films coming out of Hong Kong, which has its own separate tradition, very tied into China, but has its own separate tradition of filmmaking. It's just different place and does different things. It's interesting. A lot of the Hong Kong filmmakers work in China these days, and so it's a little bit mushy in terms of who's who. But we really, in particular, a lot of the smaller independent films that come out of Hong Kong have a very different style and flavor than what's coming from mainland China.
So sorry, I interrupted you. So those are 3 things. What are the 4?
So SF Festival, SFFILM Presents, which are little festivals, and then like presentations of big like Oscar films in the fall, and our Doc Stories Festival in the fall, which we love. So that's Presents. Then we have SF Filmmakers, which is our artist development services, which is a world-class residency that's here in the city of San Francisco, which serves about 100 filmmakers a year, plus our granting programs both in fiction films and in documentary. We're very proud of all of that, and then sort of special services to filmmakers during the festival here. Our education program, so SFFILM Education, which services almost 15,000 children in the Bay Area, teaching them about film, how to read a film, taking meaning from those movies that help them in their language classes, in their geography classes, in their history classes about the world, science classes even. And then finally, and our newest thing is the SFFILM Online Screening Room, which is everyone should download our app. You can get the app at sort of any place you get them. Whether it's the iTunes store, it's a free app. It's great for navigating the festival, of course, because it has all the schedules and tickets to buy and all that stuff. But even better, if you actually become a member of the Film Society, you actually get a number of films every month that are like films that we show in the festival. Many of them are the actual festival films. From all over the world. It's like a global travelogue. Like you get to see the entire planet through the films that we get to show you every month.
It's a curated list.
You just bring it off. You can put it on your Apple TV. You can put it on your Roku. It's available on everything, and it's a great streaming service. Just like kind of having a Netflix, but for a really cool festival.
Okay,
and that's the 5th one. So that's the SFFILM Screening Room. So festival, year-round screenings, stuff for filmmakers, stuff for kids, and then stuff for online.
So Noah, you've done your homework and you're very excited because
I love it.
because you're recalibrating the focus of what what shall I call it, the film society?
Yeah, well, that's what SF Film is. What it means to be a film institution in San Francisco has evolved over the years. And so the online screening room is a great example. Probably not a huge priority before Google and Facebook and all those folks showed up. If we were a film society, say in Chicago or in Dallas. But being in San Francisco, it's essential that we actually connect with the technological change happening around cinema in a significant way. And so, as the community around us evolves, we evolve too.
You must be very excited to be in the Bay Area. You spent most of your time in Toronto and curating for that film festival. How is Toronto Film Festival different from what you inherited when you came here 3 years ago? You came here in 2014, That's a great question. I mean, I think Toronto Film Festival is sort of premised on different ideas, and the Toronto TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival organization, kind of operates in a different way. So there are kind of apples and oranges in a way. It's a very big festival that's very driven by kind of sponsorship and sort of marketing kind of ideas that are kind of really important for the Canadian nation to kind of show itself to the world, and uses the festival as kind of a toehold for that. It's also a very big star-driven enterprise, and built like a $200 million building, which I used to run, which shows films all year long, does huge gallery shows and stuff. It's an organization that's about 10 times the size of SF Film, which is great, but it's also, when you're that big, things don't change that much. Difference here at SF Film is we're a very nimble organization. We can actually adapt to the times, adapt to new technology, explore areas of film and film culture, which maybe a bigger institution like that can't quite do because it's just so big and has so many stakeholders already in place. But here we can kind of reinvent ourselves more effectively. So I think those are... How are you reinventing yourself?
So those are whether it's the online screening room, whether it's changing artist development or financing films.
I'm talking about working with other art institutions or cultural institutions. Are you working with SF MoMA, for instance? Are you working with the Berkeley, the Pacific Archives folks? So are you working with various cultural institutions in the Bay Area?
That's actually something that goes back to my life in Toronto, because we actually opened this really wonderful building called TIFF Bell Lightbox, and we just thought all of our festival patrons would come. And we were actually surprised at the beginning that the audiences were not what we expected. And then we realized that we needed partners and we needed collaborators. And so reached out into the community at large, and actually got partners from like the Documentary Association, from the big museums, from the science and technology institutions, from the universities, and actually began rethinking what it meant to be a year-round institution and rethinking what audience meant for what we do. And it worked, and then the building really took off and all the film stuff was doing great, and we were super happy with how it all went. So same philosophy here. We're not a standalone entity. We're part of a larger cultural fabric. And so collaborating with Yerba Buena Center, with SF MoMA, with BAM PFA, even with commercial entities like the Alamo Drafthouse, is absolutely essential to our health as an organization. We're going to be doing joint talks with SF Opera, with many of the activist groups in Berkeley and here in San Francisco, like Freedom of the Press Foundation. Stanford and Berkeley provide speakers for so many of our films to provide more context. I couldn't imagine a film festival that didn't do that. It sort of stayed in its own shell. I feel like it's really important to open yourself up to this community and this kind of participation. So that's absolutely part of my philosophy. But what's as important as the differences between my Toronto experience and the San Francisco experience, I think, are what connects it. I feel very comfortable and very at home in San Francisco because, like Toronto, it's an extremely diverse city in every way, and really delights in that diversity and how we can talk to one another and how dialogue can be sparked between different groups, whether it's their country of origin, whether it's kind of their approach to the world, whether it's their sexuality, whether it's their gender, you name it. But just different approaches different backgrounds, different ideas about the world, unless we all get together and talk about it in this environment where we all live, how can others in the rest of the country and the rest of the world begin dialogue themselves? So there's a responsibility to being in Toronto and being in San Francisco, a real privilege to being around so many different cultures, that I think it behooves us to be the igniters of discussion and change.
It looks like you're all very fired up about being in San Francisco.
I love it.
You probably, your eyes are sparkling. You probably see a lot of opportunities to collaborate and grow this organization that you helm. Tell me about the grant-making aspect of the film, SF Film, because that's something probably not too many people know, that you are one of the largest grantees. Is that the right word?
Grantors, yeah.
Grantors.
Yeah.
English is a funny language.
Sure is. SF Filmmakers, which is essentially our artist development arm, has been one of the fastest growing parts of our institution. It's already been a very important driver of, I think, some of the best independent films in the United States, whether it's, as I mentioned, Fruitvale Station or Beasts of the Southern Wild. But every year, a good 10 to 15 major films comes out of this artist development crucible that we've created. It's a combination of grants, residencies, mentorships, and really taking the influences of some of the major foundations of our region and sort of applying the lessons from those foundations to our day-to-day work with artists. And so a lot of the important work happens at our residency space, which is called Film House, which is kind of the home of all of these filmmakers, both local, about 70 local filmmakers who utilize the space on a regular basis. And then about another 20 to 30 filmmakers from around the world come in as part of their grantee status to actually participate and engage in either mentorship if they need it, or what we think is the most exciting part, a peer review process, where peers at your level of filmmaking contribute to your screenplay, help you overcome production hurdles, and ensure that the best piece of art you can make is produced. So we've been adding funders to this every year. We have a robust documentary fund, a massive fund that you mentioned that funds fiction film, almost $1 million a year, towards the creation of new great fiction filmmakers. And increasingly we've become, because of this connection between art and technology that really is San Francisco, a lot of people from Europe and Asia want to actually do residencies here. So we have special programs with countries around the world to bring in their filmmakers to actually understand the benefits of all of these new technologies and how they're going to change how film really operates. YouTube alone will probably affect how people watch films for the next 20 or 30 years, even if your film doesn't even appear there. But it affects how they're financed, how they're thought through, how they're created, how long they are. These things are incredibly important for young filmmakers today. So we're very proud of our artist development services, very proud of SF Filmmakers. It doesn't always get in the forefront like the festival does, but it's sort of an equal partner in the growing success of SF film.
Do you work with Sundance labs, film labs?
Yeah, I mean, the other great program in this country for artist development is the Sundance Institute, which is the parent organization of the Sundance Film Festival. And we work very closely, and in fact, our programs tend to interlock. We do different things that are very complementary. So Sundance Labs are very famous for these very quick 2 to 4 day, super intensive opportunities for filmmakers to meet, say, the 10 best writers in Hollywood. Who are going to read their script and pepper them with notes and comments and ideas, and then poof, they have to go back and start working. Whereas for us, there's this, we see value in the philosophy of continuous engagement and different forms of mentorship along a cycle of 6 months to a year. And so we're constantly checking in with you and making sure that you're on the right track in terms of the growth of your project. Not that Sundance will never speak to you again, there's nothing like that, but the focus of their energy is on these very intensive labs, whereas our focus is on a kind of an ongoing mentorship opportunity. And so we actually share many artists. We actually talk to each other as we're designing new programs to make sure that they end up being complementary. We'll even go and talk to funders together so that they'll fund both of us in ways that will actually benefit filmmakers. So It's a great relationship. We love them. I think the Sundance Institute is just an amazing model for any nonprofit in film or not in the country. So I have nothing but respect for them, and we hope to continue to work with them.
You talked about working with other foundations also. So I was thinking about Sloan Foundation. You've got a relationship going with Sloan where the focus is on science and technology, right? Films that deal with science and technology. How did that partnership come about?
Yeah, the Sloan Foundation is such an interesting entity. They're, of course, one of the great funders of science and scientific research in the world. Without their funding, many great breakthroughs in science, and particularly in health, would not have occurred. They've funded more Nobel Prize winners than I can count on my fingers and toes. But several years ago, they decided that just as important as funding science was to actually make people understand the story of science, how scientific breakthroughs occur, and why, and how it changes society. And so they've funded some really big movies, like A Beautiful Mind, and get involved in stuff like that. But they also, and several other Oscar films, but they also like to seed independent production. And so along with a couple of other institutions in the country, we are kind of prime partners with them in both creating new filmmakers or new projects through filmmakers that we think tell the story of science either in the past or in the present really beautifully, or and at the same time engage in very public conversations about the value of science and finding films that really demonstrate the value of science. So this year we have a beautiful film, a biography of Marie Curie, who was a very female scientist in France 100 years ago, who helped discover radium, amongst other discoveries. But we're not actually focusing on necessarily her scientific discoveries here. We're actually focusing on her being an early woman in modern science. And so we have a number of other women scientists that we're bringing as part of our onstage discussion and asking, well, what has changed and what stayed the same about women in science? Because we know that there's barriers for entry, both at the university level and at the professional level. So it should be a really interesting conversation, utilizing this beautiful film as a kind of launching point.
Let me ask you this. This is a question that somebody asked me. Why is it that San Francisco is not well known in the country for its filmmakers and its filmmaking history and legacy? Charlie Chaplin came here 100 years ago and made The Kid.
Yeah. Well, actually, on the West Coast, film started in San Francisco. Yes. There were studios just south of Oakland. There were the first sort of major film studios when LA was still pretty much a desert. So, I mean, we've been in the business since the beginning. So it's a complicated question about why people don't recognize San Francisco as more of a filmmaking place. And it has a multi-tiered answer. I guess I'd start by saying on the documentary front, we're absolutely a known entity. Some of the most important documentary filmmakers in the world have lived here and have created work here. So too on the avant-garde and experimental side. Again, like a long tradition here that continues to this day, but some of the leading lights. And in fact, we're celebrating the organization that a lot of those experimental films came through, Canyon Cinema, which is having their 50th anniversary, amazing. And of course, dozens of the most important experimental artists came through there. So documentaries, and every year we have at least one film that gets a documentary Academy Award nomination. So we're doing great on the documentary and experimental side. So it's really this fiction feature side. And what's happened is that we have a ton of filmmakers up here. I mean, some of them are very famous, like Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas. But we have tons of others, but they actually keep it quiet.
Like Walter Murch.
Like Walter Murch. The reason why is because they feel as though being outside of the pressure cooker and the celebrity spotlight of LA will actually make them better artists. And so the films of so many people who actually write films and make films occur in the Bay Area with what we believe is Bay Area values inculcated, baked into their very fabric. But it's better for them as artists to kind of let that happen more organically within this place. What we're doing with our artist development services is kind of bringing to the forefront that this creativity is happening there without disturbing this peace that allows artists to just create. But, since the beginning of cinema and until cinema just, finally ends with humanity or before, whatever form it takes, we will still be a creative crucible here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and we hope that SF Film will be there to support it.
When did you discover your love for films?
Oh, at very early days. I come from an artistic family. My mother's an actress, mostly a stage actress, very involved in the theater, and my father was in the music and magazine business. And so artistic creation or support for art and artists has long been in my family. One of my brothers is a classical musician, so I guess film was the only thing not taken. So, so that was going to be mine.
My last question is...
I think I was 7 or 8 years old when I really fell in love with movies and started to consume them voraciously.
So my last question is, how has film viewing changed? When you were growing up, when I was growing up, we went to the movie theater to watch films. Today, I can watch films on my little iPhone.
Don't do that. I think film is evolving and has always evolved, actually. I think that there's this idea that there was this decisive break and the iPhone has brought in this thing where now you can watch your movies on your phone and now the world has, gone to hell, But that's actually not the case. Throughout the whole history of cinema, there's been massive technological shifts, which at the time have seemed super disruptive, but have actually brought the medium forward and actually made film more important.
Can you give an example?
Well, the switch from silent to sound being one of probably the most disruptive. 70% of the industry was wiped out. And new industry had to be brought in. Gene Kelly's masterpiece, Singing in the Rain, is about this very thing. And by the way, the advent of home video was almost equally disruptive. It created an entire parallel industry of straight-to-video titles, which had never existed before, and changed everything. And I think that long-form television in our age is an equally disruptive force, but making some of the best work out there. Big Little Lies, which just wrapped up last night, has major movie stars in it in what I would call a long-form film of some mastery. It's a beautiful movie, directed by Jean-Marc Vallée, one of the finest feature film directors of our age. So to me, this is all just very exciting. It's that we're in a process of transition into the future. And how we view things, this also just changes. Don't forget that going back to iPhones is a bit like going back to the very beginnings of cinema, where we used to have to look through goggles in a Nickelodeon at an image that's about the same size as a cell phone. So what goes around comes around, but you know what? The Nickelodeon was popular for people who wanted a quick hit on their phones, but everyone knew you had to go to the kind of circus tents where they were actually projecting movies to actually see the longer movies and the better movies. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. The cultural life of cinema will probably still exist within the arenas and auditoriums that we've come to know. And the kind of quick hits of the days of Edison will continue to be on our phones. So I look forward to the future. I think more diversity of choice for people means that more people are going to be delighting in the stories that our storytellers tell.
What about streaming? How has that changed our film viewing experience?
Funny, I don't think streaming's that different. It changes in some ways, I think, how these longer form kind of TV-based projects play out. But I don't think it actually has a huge effect on storytelling as a whole. You can just see things more easily. It can be a drag streaming just because our internet, needs to be, first of all, if Donald Trump, if you'd actually like to do an infrastructure project, can you make the internet better in San Francisco so I can stream better, as opposed to whatever else he has in mind. I think that we would all like to be able to use streaming as though it was just a more conventional sort of televisual or DVD service, something that was very much on demand. And it's getting there, but it's not there yet. But yeah, in terms of creativity, I think it really affects some of these longer form pieces that we're seeing coming out of TV. I think it's allowing documentarians also to do longer work because they just know it can be digested in a different way downstream as opposed to necessarily, for example, our Grateful Dead documentary, Long Strange Trip, is 4 hours. Not everyone's going to want to see a 4-hour film in the theater, but they will see a 4-hour film on streaming. So I think it's good. I think it actually provides more choice, more opportunities, and again, I keep going back, I think it gives filmmakers, our storytellers, the people who contextualize our lives and our culture, more opportunities, more options, and kind of more inspiration for what they do all day. And that's why we're all here.
My final question. You're sent out to a desert island and you can only take one thing with you. What film would you take?
Oh, wow. Well, that's always a tough one. I mean, I love so many movies. But I always talk about my favorite film, just because I think it's a perfect movie, is an old film from the 1930s called The Palm Beach Story by Preston Sturges. And it's actually, interestingly enough, about a film where technological change, in this case air travel, and the need for airports, drives Claudette Colbert to sort of desperate measures to try to find investors for her husband and his startup. You know, which is essentially an airport. And so it actually funny, it's come full circle to my life here in San Francisco, but to me it's a classic episodic film. It almost feels like it could be long-form television if it had been stretched out, because each of those episodes could themselves be its own film. But it's compressed and tight and perfectly written, beautifully filmed, and showcases some of the greatest actors of all time. So I'll always return to that one. I'm sure my 50th birthday is coming up, so that's probably going to be on the viewing list. So there you go.
Noah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. We'll be back again with another episode next week. Until then, goodbye.